What is up, guys and girls? Today I'm going to be showing you my little tool called QueryPro. It's written in HTML and JavaScript, but its sole purpose is to help you guys construct prepared queries in PHP. If you don't know what that is, there's a link in the description that tells you or shows you a video that talks about everything to do with prepared queries and how to write them. So you can definitely check that out. But this is actually going to show you a pretty cool way of generating those queries without having to write much code, just by filling out these form values. And so by filling out this form here, for example, for a select query, we end up with this code here. And so you can see, SQL equals DB prepare select name email from users where ID equals question mark. That's the general format of a prepared query. And then down here we bind the param user ID. So this format here first takes a letter, which is I, and that means that user ID is an integer. If I wanted to, I could do S for a string, and I could put some variable here, but we're not going to do that because our prepared query only has one parameter that needs to be bound, and that's represented by the question mark. So what we're doing in this first one here basically is just saying, hey, this is our query, this is the value that we want to use for this question mark. Now we're executing our query, we're storing the result so we can then access the number of rows returned by our query. Then over here we're binding the result, so we have a variable for name and a variable for email. And then we're fetching a result here, just standard protocol. And then we can start using those variables in any way that we would like. And then we just close up our query. And then down here we just have a simple else statement in case no results were found because of this if statement I'm highlighting now. So again, the video talking about prepared queries, what they are, why we use them, and how to write them from scratch, that's all in a video that's in the description, so check it out. But let me just go ahead and show you how to use the tool. So we're going to go over select, insert, update, and delete. I'm sorry for the little screen flash. It's something I haven't really focused on. This page is really just for using the tool instead of actually looking super nice. So we first start off with our query variable. Again, I'm not going to go into all these details. If you don't know what a variable is, you need to do a little bit of research into PHP. But we can name it query or SQL or whatever we want to do. Our next field is our connection variable. So that's the variable representing our actual database, and we would have connected to our database before the prepared query shows up. If, again, you don't know how to do that, you need to watch a different video. So we'll just say connection, okay? And then on our fetch options for our selection query, we can choose a single result or loop results. For now, we'll just keep single result. And that means that we're expecting one row of data to come out of our database. And now we can select some columns. So I'm going to pretend that what we're selecting has a column named ID, an identification number. And I'm going to say title and description. So maybe it's a blog article or some sort of page or document in the database. From the table, we'll just say it's from the articles table, but this is going to be, whatever your table is called. And then this is totally optional here, but let's just say we're looking for an article where the user ID equals something, okay? So user ID equals question mark. And again, that's the general format of prepared queries. This video is not for people that have never heard of a prepared query, although you're definitely going to be able to use this tool based on my brief descriptions of everything. But the question mark is going to represent a bound variable that's being inserted into our query, and that's really the principle of a prepared query, is to avoid having values put into the query, because that opens you up to SQL injection. Anyways, moving on. We can then do an order by or a limit and offset option. I'm going to skip those for now, but we'll come back and actually look at those in a moment. For the bind param letters, we have I, S, and D. I represents an integer, S is for a string, and D is for double or a float, like a decimal, stuff like that. So we are basically saying that we have one bound parameter, and it's I, because user ID is going to represent a number or an integer. So for our bind param letters, we just put in I. And then for our variables here, we're going to bind a variable that we have in our script somewhere. So that could be user ID. It could even be this. It could be a session, user ID, or it could just be whatever the heck you have as the variable to represent the user that you're searching an article for, okay? Now, again, we're doing a single result because we're only expecting one result, but I'm going to toggle the options in a moment so you can actually see what happens. This is already pre-filled for us. This just basically says, okay, you're taking the ID, the title, and the description. We're just going to bind the result to those variables, but obviously you could change these if you want. And down here, it changes as well. Now what you could do is copy and paste this code into your script, and essentially what's going to happen here is if I said echo the ID to, or the ID for title and description, okay? And that would actually echo out whatever these variables are set to. So if I have a database where the ID is 1, it's going to say, we could say the ID2 would become the ID1 is for title 2, and maybe the title is hello world, and the description is, you know, something simple. All right, so whatever your values are for those variables end up showing up on the page. Now if we do a loop results option here, essentially what that means is it is expecting multiple results. So this user has several articles in the database, and so we could do the same thing here. Echo ID is ID2, title is title 2, and description is description 2. Very, very simple. It's going to echo that onto a new line for every single result in the database. And so hopefully you'll be able to see how that works, you know, with the looping and everything. But obviously, if you don't know anything about PHP, you need to do a little bit more work. We can also add multiple where options. And don't worry, I'm not going to spend as much time on every single query because a lot of these fields here and options are going to line up with our other generators here. And I just want to give you guys and girls a nice little baseline to go off of. So we could say where user ID equals 2 or equals question mark, or username equals something. All right, so I don't know why you would do that, but just for the sake of actually showing you that, we can do that. And then down here, you know, we have our username, so we say S for string. So this would become user ID, and this becomes username. And now, as you can see, our bind params are updated, as is our where statement here. And so now we're getting articles basically that match up to a user ID or a username. We could also do some things like this. Or we could say, or status code equals something. And then we'll just say the status code is an integer and say status. So this is a little bit more complex. Obviously, you need to know a bit about PHP in general. But what this is doing is it's saying, okay, now we want articles that either match the user ID or username, or we don't care about the user ID and username. We just want to also find some with the status code. So now we're going to have a mix of things. So because of that, maybe we want to also select the user ID and username because we're going to get results for multiple different users. So over here, we would basically say user ID, username. And then when we come down here, we can see now we have that information. So you can do a lot of different things with prepared queries. Obviously, pretty much anything you can do in SQL, you can do with prepared queries, you know, sometimes more efficiently or less efficiently. But as you can see, the generator takes everything into account. There's a little bit of responsibility for making sure that the where statement is constructed correctly with the question marks and everything, but you shouldn't have too many issues. So as you can see now, I'm going to go into the order by, and basically what that means is I can have it automatically sorted. So if I want it to be in alphabetical order, for example, I would do order by title and ascending. Or if I wanted it to be in reverse alphabetical, I could do descending. If I wanted to get, you know, the most recent first, then I could say descending. You know, if ID is auto-incremented, where the latest article is the highest ID or number, then doing order by ID descending will essentially allow me to sort that in that manner. And so as you can see here, now it's been automatically added into our query, and so those will now return in the order of most recent first, okay? Now what we can do is then go into the limit and offset options. And for the limit, we can say, okay, well, we have, a million articles. We don't want to get those all at the same time because our script will time out, or it will be too much data for our website to process at one time. And so we want to say, okay, I only want 100 results at a time. And as you can see here, now that's added to the query, limit 100. So then you might be saying, okay, well, what happens if I go through the first set of results? Let's say there's 10 results. You're looking through all your results on a page. You've created some tool where there's options for each article that is being displayed, and you see 10. Well, you want to go to page 2, right? Well, you could do an offset of 10 there. So if you have a limit of 10 and an offset of 10, that means that the offset skips the first 10 results and then shows the next 10, or shows the next 25 and skips the first 15 or 25, whatever you want. And everything will be dynamically generated in your query below. So you have plenty of options. This is definitely going to get you started on some complex queries while making it so you don't have to write all the extra code yourself. So it can be very, very helpful, especially for people that are still learning. I'm sorry that the video is so fast, but I'm trying to cram all this information in here and really show you guys the sole purpose of this is quickness. So we're on the insert. Same thing. We're going to have a query variable. We'll just do insert to make it clear on the video which part you're on. Connection, I'll just use DB. Let's pretend we're inserting into the articles table. And what we want to do now is say which columns we're giving data to. So the ID is going to be auto-populated in our database, for example. So we're just going to supply a title, a description, the user ID of the user who posted it. And let's just keep it like that for now. As you can see, once we put in our columns, it automatically generates some question mark values here for us. And that's basically saying, hey, you're inserting these columns. Those are the only columns or only value question marks that you need. It's not strictly true because there are different things you can do with an insert statement. But for this tool specifically, it only is being used for general inserts. It's not doing any, on duplicate key logic. And again, that's something you might have to research, but there's other things you can do with inserts that are a little bit too complex for this tool right now. So same as before, we're now going to apply the bind param letters. So our title is a string, so S, description is S for string, and the user ID is an integer, so I. Now when we go down here, we want to actually say the variables. So let's pretend we have an array called data. And in that array, we have the title value, we have a description value, and then maybe we're using the current session for the user ID. So as you can see now, everything's fully generated, and we have insert equals db prepare, insert into articles, and then our columns, title, description, user ID, and then the values. And those are our bound parameters that then go in right here when we use bind param, SSI, title, description, and our user ID. So all of these go into the question marks. So the code just says, okay, the title is a string. Let's put that into the first question mark. Description is a string. Put that into the second question mark. And the user ID is an integer. Put that into the third question mark. And that tells our database that we're inserting these values for these columns in our insert statement. We execute it here, and then we look at the affected rows. We should have one row, so we could even say equals 1, for example, to make sure that it inserted one row. But the standard procedure is just to make sure that it's over 0 because we know it's only inserting one. Then what we do is we just actually get the insert ID here, and all that's doing is just taking that. If you do need it, you could actually remove this if it's not important to you. And then we just close off our SQL connection here. And then same as before, there's an else statement that allows you to do additional things if the insert query actually failed. So very, very simple. Now we'll move on to the update query. Same exact thing. On this tool and the delete tool, I've added some info blurbs because I actually created the update and delete generators today. And the select and insert generators I created over a year or two ago. So the tool is obviously always being developed, but there was a huge hiatus with it. So we'll just say update here, and we'll say con for connection, and we're going to update the articles table. And now what we need to do is set the columns that are being updated. So for this one, we'll say title equals question mark, description equals question mark. And we're not going to update the user ID or anything like that. One thing worth noting is that all of these little gray text things are just examples for you to look at the format. It's not supposed to be a recommendation of any sort related to your database. There's also a little emergency note here that says if you don't use a where statement, the update query will update every single row of data in your database. So you can completely screw up your website if you don't use a where statement when it comes to updates and deletes. Okay? All right. So we're going to say where ID equals 5, or sorry, question mark. And basically what that's saying is that we want to update an article that has ID 5 or whatever our article ID ends up being. We only want to update the title and description, meaning leave the user ID alone. And then down here, very, very similar from before, except we have to take into account also that we are setting the columns and having a where statement. And so what we do here is basically just go through left to right and look at our question marks. Okay, so we have a title, that's a string, description is a string, our article ID is an integer, so we do I. Down here we could say same kind of thing, data title, data description, and for the ID we could say data article ID. All right, and same as I was saying before, everything matches up to these letters, which match up to these question marks. All right, so when we look at our update query down here, again, update equals connection variable, prepare, update articles, set title equal question, description equal question, where ID equals question. Bind param, we have SSI, same thing. The title goes here, the description goes there, and the article ID ends up going there. We execute it, then we look to see if there's any affected rows, and if it's over 0, we know that we did update data, and if not, then there was no data updated. We could even say echo update affected rows, and that would tell us basically how many rows were updated. Okay? Now let's go to delete, and we'll just say del for delete, db for our connection variable. We'll delete from the articles table to keep it consistent. And now in our where statement, we could say something like where user ID equals this. And is trash equals something. Okay? Or we could even say 1. If we know the variable value that we want a column to look at, there doesn't have to be an actual variable in use. I just had to pause there to cough. But if you didn't catch that, essentially you don't have to use question marks, but you're going to use question marks anytime there's information coming from a user. You can never trust it. So you can't do something like, where is trash equals whatever user said. So you wouldn't want to do something like this. Never do that, because that means the user can send anything and he can seriously infiltrate your database if you do that. But if you know the exact value and you're not trusting user input, it's totally fine to put something here. You could even say user ID equals 33 if you know it, but you wouldn't want to do a user submitted ID, okay? So hopefully that makes sense. Or sorry, this should be and. So what we're doing here, we're pretending that there's a user that's clearing their trash can of articles. They've trashed some articles, but we don't delete them immediately. We just kind of put them in a trash folder. That user goes to his trash folder. He says clear trash. And now it's saying, okay, let's clear out all the trash, but only for this specific user. So down here, we just do an I for integer, and we just say user ID. Or if we're doing our session variable, we could do something like that. And as you can see, del equals db, prepare, delete from articles where user ID equals question mark, and is trash equals 1. And then here, bind the parameters. Session user ID is an integer. Del execute, and then over here, affected rows, same thing. We know that it was removed, otherwise no data was removed. And same as before, you could do something like there are del affected rows, rows deleted. Or in this case, we would say articles deleted. And that would actually echo it out on the page. So I just wanted to give you another example of how you can do things with the information in between these if and else statements. That's it. That is really it. I apologize for how fast-paced this was, for some of my mumbling and jumbling and bumbling and repeating. But hey, I really hope that this video helped you. That's how you use my tool. I'm a huge fan of it. I think it's one of the cooler things I've created. It does save time. It's a lot easier to fill out these forms than it is to write the whole query from scratch. I promise you. So if this helped you or you like it, send it on to someone that's learning how to code, especially if they're working with PHP prepared queries. Well, really, that's the only reason to send it on. But if you come across any articles or people asking for help online and you remember this, please send them this video and tool because I really do believe it will help them. Thanks so much.